In a cellar, a radio operator coils his line and writes the final message that the strip is closed. The reprisals come like weather. A patrol burns an empty cottage at the edge of the valley and drags a miller into the road for questions. A mother is slapped to the ground because a pilot slept beneath her table 2 nights ago. Fences are pulled down to make a bonfire. The villagers have rehearsed this for months. They spread out, answer simply, produce forged papers, hide nothing that can be found and everything that cannot. When the patrol leaves, the smoke hangs in the folds of the hills and the villagers return to lift blackened beams away from a root cellar where a child has been breathing through a reed. Days later the airmen who made it out begin to write. Short lines in clipped capitals travel by pouch and by chance. A belt buckle left behind becomes a keepsake. A Red Cross parcel arrives in the spring and tastes like another world. Some will come back years later, hair thinner, hands shaking as they cross the meadow and find only apple trees and the faint mound of a grave that never had a marker. The men who stayed keep their silence. They inventory the dead at night, whispering names, aligning memory with the last flight schedules, promising each other that no one will vanish into rumor. Gratitude is a loaf split 3 ways and a hand on a shoulder. Burials are quick, careful, and final. The runway is gone, but when the wind presses the grass flat, the valley still remembers the direction of takeoff. In summer and autumn 1944 the rescue called Operation Halyard did more than lift men from a field. In the hills above the Western Balkans partisans and villagers cut grass to the roots, carried stones by hand, and laid a carpet of corn stalks so that transport aircraft could land in darkness. A former tail gunner remembered the sound first as a distant river, then the sudden nearness of engines and the smell of hot oil rolling over the field. He had waited weeks in barns and orchards, fed by families who hit him at the risk of execution. The first C-47 kissed the strip, bounced once, and the pilot kept power high to avoid the tree line. Loads were light, rifles and boots were heavy, and every minute on the ground felt like a theft from fate. Over several nights more than 500 Allied airmen were lifted out. A radio operator recalled how his fingers shook on the key when a flare misfired and the valley went black, and how a farmer steadied his hands without a word. The legacy is not simple. Politics after the war buried names and twisted credit. For decades some rescuers were praised, others erased, and local graves stayed unmarked. Yet the facts endured in flight logs, manifests, and letters home that finally arrived. The myth says a perfect operation. The truth says courage braided from many strands, from pilots who threaded mountaintops to villagers who stood in cold grass and watched the sky for a promise no one could guarantee. Small men moved to the rear. Larger men up front near the door. Lifeboat ration boxes stacked by count, not by guess. A medic ticked off the cases that needed first lift priority. Engines grew from a distant hum to a presence that filled the ribs. Pratt & Whitney thunder rolled over the valley. Torches flared along the edges and were then cupped low. The first C-47 ghosted in, wheels touching dirt with a ripple. The loadmaster took the manifest and ran a finger down every line. He matched faces to numbers in a rhythm that came from months of practice. One crew chief later recalled that the list smelled of damp earth and lamp smoke, and that was how he knew the field was real. The count never felt clean. Men straggled in after days in barns. Some carried wounds. Some carried the guilt of a lost tail gunner. The roster absorbed all of it with careful pencil strokes. When a name did not answer, a partisan guide stepped out of the line and spoke for him. Fever in a hut near the river. The solution was to hold a seat until the last minute. The plane commander nodded. Fuel and daylight were the final judges. Wheels lifted. The torches went black. Silence returned. Then the next file of men appeared from the tree line and it began again. By the end of the first cycle the tally boards showed flights completed and lives moved beyond reach of patrols. Veterans later remembered the arithmetic of hope. 12 here. 18 there. Some nights more. Some nights cancelled. The final numbers would stand in official reports, but in the valley it remained personal. A list, a pencil, a hand on a shoulder, and the certainty that every correct count was a life reclaimed. The engines fade into the mountains and night returns to the field. Men step into the ruts where tires crushed wet grass, boots sinking, hearing only insects and the faint clack of a cooling radiator somewhere beyond the treeline. The last lift has taken the living away. What remains are the lists, the graves, and the fear that daylight will bring patrols who count footprints better than priests count prayers. At dawn the villagers move quickly. The runway of packed earth is raked out, furrows disguised with scattered stalks, smoldering signal pots buried under fresh soil. A boy carries away a panel cut from a flour sack that had guided the approach. Women fold blankets that smell of fuel and smoke. In a nearby orchard, two men lift a rough cross and set it straight. A pilot who bled out on the sled to the aid post lies beneath boards cut from a ruined barn. The partisan medic notes the hour on a sweat-stained card and pockets the dog tag for safekeeping. By noon distant engines throb and die. Columns feel closer. Carts are rolled under sheds, and the field becomes a meadow again. The schoolteacher memorizes the names of those who departed in the last flights, a rosary made of manifests. He will send them through a chain of couriers to an address in Italy if the couriers live long enough. The 1st Dakota settles low over the treeline. Partisans hold a rope at the far end to warn off cattle and curious children. Brakes chatter. Tires grab. Before the tail swings straight the loadmaster is at the door, counting survivors by patches and serial numbers, pushing blankets aside to weigh each pack. A medic checks frostbitten hands and trench foot, nods or shakes, and the list moves on. More than 500 will pass this way before the season turns, but each boarding feels singular and fragile. Night air carries the smell of pine, damp earth, and dope from patched canvas. Turnaround is a ritual learned under fire. Engines never sleep. Fuel goes in first, then the human cargo, then sacks of penicillin and radio batteries for the stay behind. Ammunition is last if there is margin, which there rarely is. The strip length robs them of choices. Every kilogram is argued. A veteran pilot remembered trimming the elevator for an early liftoff, knowing the ridge at the end will not move. He said the airplane felt like a held breath until the wheels unglued. German patrols probe the valleys. Sometimes tracers sow a red hem along the far hill. The perimeter tightens, women pass baskets of spent brass to keep ankles from twisting, boys stamp out lamp glow with handfuls of dirt. The signalman checks wind with a strip of cloth and reports in clipped Serbian and English. A gust steals across the pasture, and the plan shifts again. The ground boss scratches out a new order of departures. Tail numbers replace names to keep the list clean if someone is captured. When a load is too heavy, the pilot looks at faces and asks for 3 to wait for the next lift. No one argues long. An airman leaves his keepsake pistol in the grass to buy the margin needed. Another hands over a steel thermos, a silly weight that suddenly matters. Chocks are kicked free. The tail lifts early, wheels bite where cows chewed the mat thin, and the ship runs out of runway with 6 inches to spare. In the dark, 100 people exhale together, then reach for the next can of fuel. Counting began before the engines even turned. In a barn lit by lanterns, an OSS officer and a partisan clerk sat at a rough table and built a roster name by name. Dog tags on the table. Serial numbers read aloud. Nicknames crossed out. The rule was simple. No paper, no seat. A radio operator who later told his story remembered the fear of duplication. 2 Smiths from different crews. 1 Miller who used his middle name since Sicily. The pencil paused with every uncertainty because a wrong mark could leave a man behind. On the hillside the runway crew finished brushing the clay and corn matting. Smoke pots waited. When the code came in, the clerk folded the manifest into a breast pocket and the column formed. Country roads. No talking. At the strip, a flight sergeant checked the roster against a fresh chalkboard. Weight mattered. A Dakota could not lift sentiment. Days settle into a rhythm of hiding, listening, and moving. An OSS radio somewhere up the ridge stutters at set hours, mast disguised as a poplar. The message, when it comes, is short and dry. Weather favorable. Prepare sight. The men practice the recognition panels, chalk marks, and hand signals that will call a transport in from black sky to blacker earth. They whisper aircraft loads and sequence numbers as if they are prayers. Hunger sharpens everything. Corn is boiled until it bursts, plums are pitted and dried on roof slats. A grounded navigator teaches a boy how to read a compass. A gunner with a burned shoulder wraps his arm in linen soaked with a village remedy and digs a drainage ditch because it lets him stand straighter. They measure time by the patrol schedule, by the angle of shade against a ruined wall, by the steady patience of people who have lived under occupation for years. At dusk they reach the meadow. Men and women crawl on hands and knees, lifting stones, cutting roots, rolling woven mats to make the ground less cruel. Smoke pots and torches are hidden under blankets, ready to bloom in a pattern only a C-47 crew will recognize. The valley becomes sound. First the crickets, then an answering hum that gathers like thunder in a tunnel. Faces tilt upward. Hearts pound against dirty shirts. The lights come alive in the agreed order. The transport drops a wing and settles, tires hammering, tail wagging as it fights ruts and slope. The wind from the props flattens the grass and throws straw into eyes. A crew chief leans out and counts with his fingers. Men run bent double, guided by hands on their backs. A villager presses a small icon into an airman's palm. An OSS sergeant checks a manifest by touch in the dark. Then they are aboard, crammed, shaking, smelling oil and canvas. A final flare hisses out. The pilot hauls the plane down the strip, lifts a fraction too late, clears the tree line by a breath. The meadow shrinks, torches wink away, and the valley returns to the night. In the din, stomachs still empty, the airmen finally let themselves believe that the long wait has ended. Engines cough to life before the stars have shifted. The strip is a narrow scar across a mountain pasture, rolled flat and matted with corn stalks. OSS men and villagers haul jerrycans of 100 octane from mule carts, hands stinging from cold metal. Fueling is done with funnels and cloth filters, no light but hooded lamps and a sliver of moon. A pilot from a previous run described the ground as a barn floor that fights back, rutted and short, the kind that punishes late decisions. Crew chiefs talk through weight and balance by touch and habit, chalking figures on a tailgate while the engines drum for time they do not have. One remembers counting days by the sound of church bells and the rhythm of hunger. Another remembers a hand pressed to his shoulder as he limped past a German poster promising rewards for pilots captured alive. They do not sleep. They rehearse the path to the strip, the order of boarding, the rule against running until the final signal. Tight timelines crush every decision. The moon will be gone in 20 minutes. The wind has swung to the north, bringing a drift of ground fog and the metallic taste of coming rain. The radio finally cracks with the prearranged phrase group. Lanterns are hooded twice to shape the alignment. A torch is dragged along the far edge so the pilots can read depth. Everyone knows the Luftwaffe has flown reconnaissance at dawn. If the planes are late, the field will become a map reference and a firing range. Boot steps rise from the gully. The nearest sentry signals with a palm. Two figures move along the hedgerow, then a third. The patrol pauses, listening. A dog whines and is hushed with a kick. The villagers freeze, hands pressed to tools that are not weapons. The OSS man murmurs a change to the timing, pushes the transmit key, and lifts his eyes to the eastern stars. Engines arrive as a vibration before sound, a dull tremor that hardens into the steady beat of twin cylinders. The first Dakota ghosts over the treetops, flares, and drops onto the rough strip with a bounce that tastes like iron. The airmen break from cover and count steps in the dark. For a moment the night seems to tilt. Then the loadmaster is there, hauling, counting, shoving. The pilot rides the brakes. The patrol is closing. The second aircraft is on final. The timeline holds by the width of a breath. They wake before the roosters, aching with hunger and the weight of borrowed boots. The air is damp, a Balkan dawn that smells of smoke and cut hay. A villager slips in with dark bread, a ladle of thin soup, and a tiny triangle of cheese saved for a stranger in a torn flight jacket. The airman thanks him with a nod and presses a small needle kit into his palm, the last thing from his survival pack that might be useful. He was trained to move at night, to keep low in ravines, to trust codes more than promises. Here, he is learning to trust faces. In pockets ride silk maps creased to softness and a blood chit promising reward to anyone who helps. There are also the codes that change by week, simple sentences that can be spoken without drawing attention. An old woman tests him by asking for a detail of his unit crest and smiles when he answers without hesitation. A teenaged guide appears, threadbare cap, fierce eyes, a rifle almost as tall as he is. They slip through orchards and along livestock tracks, pausing when dogs bark on the far slope. German patrols comb the valleys, a wrong footfall can turn a rescue line into a trap. The tail rocks, the pilot holds it true, and the ship rattles toward a stand of poplars that were supposed to be farther away. Brakes chatter. Dust swallows the lamps. The left wheel skips a hummock and comes back. The transport slows, turns in a grinding arc, and stops with room measured in heartbeats. For a second no one moves. Then the side door swings and cool night air pours into the cabin with the smell of damp hay and wood smoke. A flight mechanic remembers his hands shaking as he counts the first men aboard, passing them canteens and a sack of hard candy saved for this exact moment. A downed navigator limps up the step, ribs taped under a borrowed shirt, eyes wet with relief. He will later say that the engine heat felt like home. No one hears him now over the ticking of metal and the farmyard chorus rising again. Fuel drums roll. Empty canisters go out, wounded come in, manifests scratched with a carpenter's pencil. A radio man kneels in the grass, keying a confirmation to the distant base while mosquitoes needle his neck. The pilot stares at the tree lean and runs the departure in his head, tail into the wind, full weight, no second try. Villagers pass a loaf hand to hand. A shepherd boy touches the cold skin of the airplane with careful fingers, as if it might spook. Engines wind up. The transport shudders forward, gathers itself, and lunges. Grass flattens, stones ping the belly, and for a stretched instant the wheels drum at the meadow's edge. The ship lifts, clears the poplars, and climbs into a sky that seems suddenly vast. On the ground, the lamps wink out one by one. In the cabin, a crew chief exhales and logs the time. Somewhere aft, a rescued airman begins to believe he will see home again. Night holds its breath as the mountain village dims every ember. The cut field is almost invisible, a rectangle teased from corn and rye, its edges brushed smooth by hands that have learned to move without sound. Men and women pass in a chain, laying planks, straw mats, and woven sacks filled with earth to harden the strip. The OSS radio operator cups his headset, counting seconds by pulse, waiting for the code group that will confirm the runway is seen. If the confirmation does not come soon, the pilots will turn back and all this risk will curdle into daylight fear. German patrols prowl the roads below, trucks growling in short bursts, lights hooded. Scouts have reported new checkpoints and a squad detouring toward the ravine. Betrayal is not an abstraction here. Refugees carry rumors like splinters. A neighbor disappeared after speaking to the wrong stranger. A boy brags about a pistol he has never fired. The partisans and villagers watch one another with the wary patience of people who farm under artillery trajectories. Downed airmen wait in a barn that smells of cut hay and damp leather. Some still wear shredded flight suits, others have traded for peasant coats. Dark shapes slide out of the sky, a wing and then a fuselage, the landing lights masked until the final seconds. The pilots hunt the fiery L, judge wind by the torch's bend and the tremor in the smoke. The lead Dakota flares high, settles, bumps hard on the uneven earth, and howls as its props reverse and bite the night. Men sprint. The loadmaster drops the gate. Airmen and villagers heave crates of fuel and sacks of flour aside and haul people up the ramp, a line of hands pulling and pushing. Names are checked against a grease pencil board. Fellman stumbles inside and turns to see the second aircraft float in, lower, cleaner, wheels kissing the dirt with a sigh. A sentry fires 2 quick shots into the ground. A warning. Headlights on a distant road blink and vanish. Jibillion keys an update and feels the hot breath of a torch at his elbow. The pilots waste no moments. Throttles forward, tail up, the first aircraft runs the gauntlet of fire and lifts away into stars that seem suddenly close. The second follows. The torches gutter in the prop wash and spring back. Silence pours in after the last engine fades. The field is a black wound again. On the ridge a child laughs once, then covers his mouth. Men embrace without words. Jibillion writes a final note in his log by the glow of a coal. 2 aircraft away. More to follow. The flame has shown the path. The prayer is that it holds until the next night. The meadow is barely a runway, a rectangle carved from corn and stubborn earth, its edges marked by hooded lamps and small fires that breathe smoke low across the grass. The villagers have rolled the field until their hands blistered. Guerrilla sentries ring the hills, listening for engines and for anything that sounds like trouble. The wind is fickle, the ground uneven, and somewhere in the darkness a dog will not stop barking. Far out, 2 dull stars appear and grow. A pilot rides the blacked-out C-47 down a valley that looks wider on a map than from this cockpit. He holds a steady descent, throttle breathing, flaps creeping to the stop. The crew chief braces for the bump, eyes snapping between the altimeter and the void beyond the windscreen. Behind them, canvas seats wait for men who have been hiding in barns and ravines, counting days by the rattle of patrol trucks on distant roads. On the ground the signal team works through rehearsed motions. A shuttered lamp winks the pattern. Smoke pots tick and flare. A strip of white cloth becomes a windsock, stiff on a pole cut from an orchard. A farm cart is dragged aside at the last moment. A local remembers pressing his heel into a soft patch of earth and feeling water seep up, then throwing down more straw. He does not know how much a transport weighs, only that it must not break through. Engines now, a rising twin roar. The aircraft ghosts over the tree lean, drops a wing, straightens, and commits. Tires meet rough grass with a thud that climbs through the fuselage and into the bones of everyone watching. Near midnight the field lies long and true, a strip of earth pressed flat against the dark. Torches are buried inside tins so the light spills upward but does not spill far. Men test the run by sprinting its length. They count the steps, picture the weight of a loaded transport, and pray they have stolen enough yards from the mountain. Before first light, sentries rotate to the tree line, listening for boots on gravel. The workers lie back in the cut corn and watch the stars fade. An American navigator will later recall the sudden calm, the way the dew lifted like breath from the ground as if the earth itself were waiting. When the dawn wind turns the tasseled edges and a distant engine threads the sky, the valley holds still. A runway has been carved from corn and courage, and the first life it will save is arriving on that sound. Night folds over the hills and the field is only a darker shape against the forest. The partisans move like shadows, hauling fuel cans and bundles of rags. Villagers crouch at the runway edge with sacks of sand and battered buckets. They have one task before the aircraft reach the valley floor. Build light where there is none. OSS radioman Arthur Jibillion kneels beside a wooden crate and checks his set by touch alone. Static whispers in his headset. The code groups are short and tight. Strip prepared. Winds light and variable. No enemy movement observed. He thinks of the men hiding in barns and caves along the ridges. Downed airmen who count time by hunger and fear. They need engines in the night and a line home cut through the dark. Kerosene steals heat from the hands as the rags are twisted into torches. Partisans set them along the rough earth in a long L that marks the landing path and the flare of rollout. Others ready smudge pots for the dawn if the mission pushes past the edge of night. The air is still. A dog barks far away. In the tree lean, sentries cock their heads to the north, where German patrol roads snake between hamlets. A senior Chetnik guide nods once. Light them. Flame climbs the cloth and licks at the wind, unsteady, then steady. The runway appears as two necklaces of fire. The villagers step back, faces orange, eyes on the slope where the aircraft must appear. Jibilian taps the key and sends the signal to commit. Then the waiting begins. Every second is risk. Fire means hope and also target. Sergeant Richard Fellman remembers the taste of smoke in the air as he waited near the field, his jacket stiff with dust, boots tight over swelling feet. He had seen the torches from a ridge the night before and thought they were stars fallen to earth. The guides pushed him and the other airmen to the edge of the strip with low voices and firm hands. When engines come, move. When wheels touch, run. The first sound comes as a rumor. Then the valley fills with it, a layered thunder that quivers in the chest. 2 C-47s in trail, maybe 4, maybe more. A landing gear thumps a hidden lump of earth, a tire wobbles, and the pilot rides it out on skill and luck bought by 100 quiet hands. By the last lift a ledger's worth of men have risen from these hills. The network collapses back into ordinary life. The scythes return to hay, the lanterns to kitchen shelves. Years later veterans remember the taste of plum jam, the ache of climbing in borrowed shoes, and the way a line of villagers stood silent in the dark, not waving, not asking for thanks, only watching until the valley swallowed the sound of the plains. The job begins at dusk, when the heat finally lifts from the valley and the mountains fall into a blue hush. Men and women pour out of the stone houses carrying shovels, hoes, and scythes. They move in lines through a waist-high sea of corn, cutting clean swaths toward a meadow the maps call a field and the pilots will soon call a runway. Chickens scatter. An ox snorts in its yoke. Somewhere beyond the ridgeline, a German patrol road shivers with engine noise, too distant to place, close enough to hurry every hand. An OSS team leader walks the ground with a compass and a measuring tape knotted at regular spans. He counts his paces, scratches stakes into place, and marks the approach with strips of fabric torn from sacks. Airmen hiding in the hills drift down at last light to help. Some have boots, some only torn shoes wrapped in cloth. They fall in beside villagers without ceremony. An American gunner later remembered the rhythm of those blades and the way the villagers saved the last of their breath for work, not talk. By lantern and moon, the corn comes down. Stalks are piled off the center line and lashed into low walls to catch gusts and keep the soil from drifting. Boys rattle wagons over the stubble. Older men drag a heavy wooden roller back and forth until the earth feels tight underfoot. A farmer with a face like weather brings his oxen and leans his whole weight into the traces. He will tell his daughter years later that the animals seemed to understand they were pulling for more than hay. The ground crew spreads white cloth along the touchdown marks, then darkens it with dirt until it becomes a muted guide, visible from the air yet invisible from the road. A radioman checks his set, tests a hand lamp, and times the intervals for the signal code. He keeps a finger on his watch as if seconds were nails holding the night together. There are setbacks. A sinkhole collapses under the roller and swallows a man to the waist. They haul him out laughing to hide their fear and fill the wound with brush and stamped clay. A sudden wind rolls off the ridge and lifts dust into their eyes. They turn their backs, blink it clear, and keep leveling. Someone starts a pot of thin soup. It tastes of smoke and salt and it warms the hands enough to grip a tool again. By the time the messenger reaches Bari, rumor has become route and code. The briefers repeat the essential truth: the airstrip does not yet exist, but it will by nightfall. The Balkans are waiting with a runway made of trust, and the plan, finally, is to believe them and arrive. The network begins with a knock on a farmhouse door and a breath held in the dark. In the hills of western Serbia, far from any airfield, families pass word from well to well and from pasture to churchyard. A pilot with burned hands is led across a threshing floor and into a hayloft that smells of cut clover. A grandmother presses black bread into his palms. "You are safe here," she says without words, and points to the ladder. By summer 1944, hundreds of Allied airmen are drifting into these valleys after raids on the Ploiești oil fields. German patrols comb the roads. The villagers move faster. Children carry messages folded under shirt collars. A shepherd swings wide with his flock to screen a column of strangers. At dusk, a schoolteacher traces a route on a cracked map and hands it to a partisan guide. The men of the local Chetnik detachments post lookouts on the ridgelines, counting truck engines echoing through the gorges. Names ripple quietly through the system. General Mihailovic, whose units hold the hills. George Musilin of the OSS, who slips back in with a radio. Arthur Jabillion, the young radioman, hunched over a set hidden beneath a burlap sack while the room hums with flies. They listen for Bari and answer with coordinates written on the back of a cigarette packet. The reply is short and precious. Hold. Airlift approved. Holding is the hardest task. The villagers share their winter stores in August. Cheese is wrapped in leaves. Plums are boiled into jam for calories. A tailor stitches trousers from homespun to hide uniforms. A priest keeps a ledger of names so families can write to mothers later. The ledger is tucked under floorboards when the nearest garrison sends a sweep. Night after night the guides move in files of 4. They step on stone where they can to hide prints. When a river must be crossed, the tallest wades first with a rope at his waist. On the far bank an airman stumbles and a farmer catches him by the collar with the same quick hand he uses on a runaway calf. Dawn finds them in an orchard. Bees drum in the hives. A boy brings a dented kettle of chicory brew. The runway is a pasture called Galavica near Pranjani. It looks impossible. Men cut the grass with scythes. Women carry armfuls of woven mats to smooth the ruts. A cart breaks a wheel and the blacksmith works until his shirt is translucent with sweat. Smoke pots are placed, lanterns tested, signal panels laid out in a hard white X. Engines arrive before the eye admits it. The first C-47 drops into the valley like a barn door with a soul. Airmen sprint from hedges with manifest slips pinned inside their shirts. Villagers line the edge of the field and keep count with their lips. The cost is real. Villagers face searches. Guerrillas move camps. Graves appear where no one wants them. Yet the memory persists in letters, in reunions, and on a lonely ridge where the wind still crosses a field that once held a line of fire to guide strangers home. Night maps litter the OSS desk like fallen leaves, pencil lines running across the Balkans where mountains fold into darker mountains. The first reports are scraps carried by static, downed American airmen hiding with villagers in western Serbia, German patrols on the roads, and a resistance network that moves by whispers and moonlight. Names surface and sink in the radio hiss. A meadow near Pranjani. A schoolteacher who trades bread for bearings. A priest who knows which valley is safe after dusk. George Musilin studies the fragmentary signals and traces a corridor for salvation. Logistics first, heroics later. A field must be found, measured, and disguised. Fuel and medical kits must travel the same goat paths as the rumors. Every step must connect to a runway drawn only in the imagination. The plan will die if it cannot breathe on the ground. A veteran sergeant from the 15th Air Force recalled the first promise of rescue as both rescue and risk. He had limped from a wrecked B-24 with burns on his arms, sheltered in a barn while a family boiled potatoes thin enough to share. He remembered the way the wind through the broken board sounded like engines that never arrived. Word came from a teenage courier carrying a scrap of paper in his shoe: "Keep moving east at night, help is coming from men who will speak your names before you can speak theirs." OSS radio man Arthur Jabillion hears the same story through dots and dashes. Villagers are passing the airmen along like fragile cargo. German columns sweep the valleys in daylight. A runway exists only as an idea that must be hammered into earth by hands already blistered from harvest. The codebooks say rendezvous and extraction. The mountains say mud, fog, and patience. The plan hardens. Surveyors count paces across a pasture at dusk, marking ruts with stones that look like any other stones. Signal panels are cut from bedding. Torches are tested and hidden. The timetable is fitted to the sky, silence until the hour when a Dakota silhouette can slide between ridgelines. Muselin writes the sequence on a single page that can be burned in a tin can. Another airman later described the long walk to the mustering point as a parade of hush. Boots wrapped in rags. Carts squeaking under sacks that conceal spare parts and hope. In the distance a church bell, then nothing but the scrape of breath. He remembered the smell of plum smoke and wet hay, and a woman pressing into his hands a wooden cross and a slice of bread, as if both might weigh the same against fear. Night falls over the Balkan ridgelines and a bomber breaks apart in the cold wind. Parachutes bloom like pale seeds. A radio operator hits the ground hard, hears dogs in the distance, and tastes soil in his mouth. The map in his head is useless now. He needs food, a friend, and a way out before the searchlights find the canopy snagged in a tree. Somewhere below, a farmyard lantern sways. He chooses the dark between the rows of corn and begins to crawl. A miracle is not a promise. It is a plan that somehow holds. By mid-1944 Allied crews are falling across Yugoslavia in steady numbers after strikes on oil fields, rail yards, and bridges. Mountain weather tears formations apart. Engines fail over forests. German patrols and collaborators sweep the valleys. Survival depends on strangers who have nothing to spare. Veterans remember the sting of wood smoke in low huts, the shock of being handed warm bread by hands that shook, and the burn of home-made brandy that steadied a ruined night. Word reaches Allied bases in Bari and the Office of Strategic Services listens. American officers study scattered reports from downed crews and from Serbian guerrilla networks who claim they can hide the airmen and even launch them back into the sky. The plan forms at the edge of possibility. Build a landing strip in the hills. Bring transport aircraft in at night. Leave no trace by dawn. On a meadow near the village of Pranjani, farmers, students, priests, and fighters cut brush, pull stumps, and line up a runway by compass. Oxen drag sledges to pack the soil. Cornstalk mats bridge soft ground. Boys carry stones to whitewash crude markers. Women sew bandages and heat kettles for the sick who drift in from barns and caves. A hand-cranked radio, assembled from smuggled parts, whispers to Italy through static. The first night is a test of nerve. Torches stand ready, their light hooded. Signal sheets are laid out. The hillside is silent but for insects and the click of a watch. Then the valley begins to tremble. Dakota transport aircraft descend between black walls of mountain. Wheels touch and bounce. Brakes chatter. Men spill from the fuselage rolling fuel drums and sacks. Others load the first group of airmen, thin, bearded, eyes ringed by exhaustion and relief. Every minute matters. German columns probe roads not far away. Betrayal is a constant rumor. Families pass food up the line without speaking. A chaplain notes names for a manifest so parents will know their sons live. Mechanics check tires by feel. Pilots walk the strip with a lantern cupped in a hand. The takeoff is a leap at the stars, the runway falling away with inches to spare. Flights repeat through late summer and into autumn. Crews who were lost are counted again, this time against a different horizon. More than 500 Allied airmen leave those hills alive. Many return to duty. Some carry a photograph of the people who fed them when they had nothing to trade but trust.